functionality in class. And I do this by referencing the abstract body. So I'm from Pittsburgh, which is also known as the Steel City in the City of Bridges. It's the place that I call home. It's big on the steel and iron history of the region is seen throughout it. So Pittsburgh is also a part of the Rust Belt. And this not only had an influence on the surrounding architecture, but you often find remnants of the structure scattered about. And they start to tell a story of how it was all made, so how Pittsburgh came together. But it also left this patina that's found covering homes in the area and businesses closest to the mills. So this is an image of the Mon Valley area, which I am from. So I went to school right around here. I live like a mountain away from this area. This here is the Edgar steel mill. It's one of the first operational, and it's still operating today. But I drove past this every day as a kid, and I think that this has a huge influence on my work, but also my research and my teachings as well. So this is one of the steel mills around that I also just would enjoy visiting and seeing. And I wanted to add this image because you'll see within a lot of my work that I give a lot of my materials a patina that looks age. And the age look is influenced from the area that I grew up with. So I've always been interested in finding the discarded and giving it a new life. And thinking of the areas that I explored as a child and not knowing anything about them, and going in and just trying to figure out what it was and make up things for it. I'm also interested in this kind of how you have this really old, decrepit, falling apart building with this like beautiful natural patina, but how nature starts to take out over it as well, but also how people do. So the left behind of people who are visiting. So seeing the natural patina, but then this patina of people coming in and spray painting and adding graffiti. So I really enjoy those two. This is an image just to give you an idea of what Pittsburgh used to look like and why this patina is all over our homes and the businesses. So as I start to make my work, I work from a list of words, I would say, in my process. When people ask me what my work's about, the list is what I always go back to. So bodies, home, community, labor, humility, refuse, cast off, history, so on, so much more. So I kind of just find materials and then I start to think about these different words that all really mean something to me, especially bodies, home, and community. And I think the reason behind that is because as a kid I was pretty shy and clingy, and I didn't feel comfortable speaking, so I would always rather show you things through my body, with my body, or through making. So I'm going to show some of my older work, and this is where I really started to think about the body and start exploring the body. So I am really also bringing labor into the conversation. I worked at the creamery at Penn State to put myself through college. And while we were there, we had to wear hairnets. And hairnets are often seen as these kind of gross things that you have to wear on your body. But because I had them all throughout my apartment just from bringing them home every day, I found them to be these really beautiful objects. The colors they had, the shadows they cast, just the materiality of that. So I wanted to really explore it. So this first piece here is just me really experimenting with the hairnet and the shapes that I can do, I can make with it, the shadows I can cast with it, really looking at it as a formal element. And I continue to try this in different areas, in different spaces. What does it mean to bring this object that's very personal, but into this public space of thinking of it in the elevator there. be upset about it. And then once it came off my body and was in their presence, they were kind of grossed out about it. So it was this push and pull between something they wanted and something they wanted nothing to do with. But this image here I really love because it really starts to show the colors, how the light hits it, the cast, shadows it creates, and why I really love this material. And I continue to work with this, explored it in a space, creating a wall with this, not only thinking about labor and the fact that these are hairnets, but also bringing in the pattern of it. So it's this really tight-knit honeycomb pattern, and so bringing this into a larger scale. And then also thinking about the honeycomb and thinking of the bee and the worker bee with that as well. But still playing with those formal elements of really looking at this formally. I started to perform with it as well, bring it back onto my body, but in a different way. And what does that mean and what does that look like? And from performing with my body, the next piece that I started to work with was really thinking about the idea of concealing and revealing. I got here from the hairnets because thinking of the hairnets is something that conceals your hair, which is a huge part of someone's identity as well. And then also thinking about the color of the hairnets, they kind of really lead to thinking of those with darker hair. So with this piece is made out of Scotch tape, and I layered it upon my face 20 different times and then peeled it off. And this is what the piece looked like when it all came together. And my idea with using and choosing Scotch tape also was because I have trichotillomania, which is a hair pulling disorder. So thinking about how can I share that experience with others, and I always thought about as a kid, or if you were at work or somewhere and you just had Scotch tape sitting around, I at least would always like put it on my hands, wrap it around my fingers, around my arms, and then peel it off. And it's this like weird sensation, and sometimes it would pull here with it, but not always. But it was something that I would just continuously do, and there's this like sensation and this gratification you get afterwards for some reason. So for me, that related to this obsessiveness with pulling my hair out. So I thought that this was a great way to show that. And because it was myself, I just used my face and just did it as many times as I could to really create a sculpture that had a presence. And then I will show it with the video, and the video also starts to bring in that idea of concealing and revealing. So from there, I started to really use just more industrial materials, and this was one of the last things that I did in undergrad, and in here really thinking, like I was still thinking about the body, I I was still thinking about bodily experiences, but also referencing architecture. So with this piece here, you can see the reference of like a suspension bridge. And I'm also thinking about the body as like the skeleton, as the spine of a body. And you can think about the hands almost being stretched out at the top, being held. I have it looped down and being held down by crochet thread, if you can see it in there, just to really hold down these areas. And this piece touches on, I feel like, a lot within that list, as it's thinking about the body, as it's thinking about architecture. It starts to bring in history, as these loops, can reference the noose, especially with the kind of rope that it has, this manila rope. And with that, I'm also exploring the ideas of gender and masculine versus feminine traits. So using this manila rope, which is often used in sailing and boating, but using the knots from a crochet technique, and then also bringing in the crochet thread at the bottom. With a lot of my work, I'd like to, I'll buy a certain quantity of rope, and more recently making my own rope, I'll make a certain quantity. And whatever I don't use in the sculpture or in the space, I will leave attached to the sculpture. And really, I want to keep this idea of like continuance, like this can continue on with that ball there. So give that idea. And here's a closer up of kind of those tension threads that I put in there. And with this piece, looking at it, there's this overall tone to this piece that this piece gives. And I feel like it's a heavier one, it's a sadder one, more serious. I installed this piece a second time, and the space was different, so I oriented the piece differently. And with this installation here, I feel like it really opened up this piece to be a more playful piece. I don't necessarily see the reference of the body in this piece as much, and it becomes a piece that's really focusing on just the formal elements. So the contrast between the knots and the organic movement within those lines, and within the thicker rope, but then the thin lines that are creating this tension, but bringing in those straighter, more architectural looking lines. So this here is an image of my thesis show, and I put this in there to really speak about how I moved and jumped from some of my older work, which I think that piece that I just showed before here really moved me into the work I was making in grad school. So here I was really thinking about the body, and as I sit and reflect back on it, I really started to think about somatic experiencing, which is a specific approach to somatic therapy. It was developed by Dr. Peter Levine, and it's based on the idea that traumatic experiences can lead to dysfunction in your nervous system, which can keep you from fully processing the experience. And the goal of this type of therapy is to help you notice bodily sensations stemming from mental health issues, and use the awareness to acknowledge and work through painful and distressing situations. And this therapy and this experiencing, though I've not gone through it, I really think that this is what I was speaking to in my graduate studies and research. With a lot of the pieces in here, and a couple of the pieces that are in the show in the gallery, and I'll speak about them as well. But I was really thinking about myself within the work. So really thinking of the work representing myself, or thinking of me kind of acting or performing with the work, but also the way that the work is installed and how I am the wrapping that I'm doing with all the work, the kind of weaving this rope through the spaces, this really repetitive action. So when people ask me about the pieces in the show, it's often, I can explain it through the way that I feel. So this piece here is in the gallery as well. This is called Untitled Chapter 1. And I'm always thinking about these two structures as individuals along with the one in the center. The way that I've spaced out this piece is that the two pieces are separated by my shoulder width, and the start of the knots on the chain kind of lay right below where my head is. So really thinking about my body being in there, being kind of held up, being supported. The knots that I have here, I forgot the name of it, but you remember. A daisy chain. So it's really just one long piece of rope, and you're creating these loops and pulling them onto each other, and they're really just supporting one another, interlocking with one another. And I really liked that metaphor of that knot, and that's another reason why I really love using rope and using knots, because I feel like it's this really kind of, you can look at it and see it as this chaotic, this chaos, but there's really an organization to it. So using the knots as a metaphor. But this piece was started, again, from just finding material. So it started with those two brackets that I didn't know what to do with, and I was like, oh, these can hold something. And thinking about balance and thinking about the act of piercing through something and really holding it up this way. This piece, I feel, has a heavy sense to it, a heavy emotion to it, and with all of my work, I do want it to be playful and inviting. So with this one, I added some color to the side just to kind of break that tension a little bit, to use that as a way for you to enter the piece, because the piece can be very startling as it, you see it does reference the crucifix as well. And though I'm not a very religious person, I do not kind of push away or shy from that, because I think there's an emotion and energy there that I am also feeling when I was creating this piece. This was another piece in my show using a different rope, and this was like a grate that I found and just kind of weaved it through. With this one, thinking about entanglement, being entangled within something, but also wanting to reference hair as well. So bringing the body in that way. That's why in this one I started to wrap it in different ways, thinking of these as braids as well. Bringing in some t-shirt rope for just a little touch of color, but also some diversity within the rope itself. This piece is in the show. This piece is using two spring leaves that I found, that I purchased. They're like antique ones. And I'm not sure what kind of vehicle they come from, but a spring leaf is part of like the suspension system on a car. So it really helps to hold the balance of the whole thing together. And with this piece, I was really thinking about balance. It's a very simple piece of just the spring leaf and a 4x4 and then a 6x4 laying on top of it. But I really thought about those two as bodies, but also places for bodies as well. And places for bodies to lay and balance, and it becomes this kind of meditative act. And though the piece is not meant to be performed on, it's kind of like an inside treat of being the artist, that this is how I felt the piece. And I invited a friend of mine to do it, and he found it super meditative and would come out and just lay on the piece to actually meditate, because you are just balancing, you're finding the center of gravity within the piece, within yourself. And you have to kind of be still with it. So I really enjoy that about that piece, and I think that, it as itself speaks to that as well. As you can imagine, there's like references of a seesaw or thinking about railroad ties as well, and balancing on those two, whether it's like walking along the railroad tracks or if it's thinking about playing on a seesaw. This piece here is also in the show in the gallery. It's called Untitled Chapter. And with this piece, I see all of these as individuals, as different bodies. And I just wanted to create these different bodies that their bodies tell a story and tell a different experience, and thinking about what can be told from your body, and that's why they're all different. But also thinking about the placement with them and how they're all a group, they're a family, they're a unit, but there's thinking about the different units, there's tension within it, relationships within each one. So when I install this piece, I'm always thinking about, it's not always installed the same way, but I'm kind of just arranging the family, the individual units, thinking about the tension that I can create between the individuals. This piece here is called, it's untitled, but it's a self-portrait. I found the 4x4 that is used at Home Depot in the scraps area, and I was like, I don't need it, but I picked it up and it was the same height as me, and I was like, okay, I guess I need it. I feel like I'm laying in the scrap pile at Home Depot. So I brought it back. And this piece actually went through not necessarily different transformations, but my feelings behind it changed as I was making it. So feeling kind of blocked, feeling held down, kind of overworked, not feeling as great about myself, is how it kind of started, and how I saw the piece for a little bit. So thinking about these heavy chains really kind of holding you down, but also kind of being on the spotlight. And I started to think about historically why I may be thinking this, maybe feeling this, and thinking about images that I've seen of myself, in history and in the past, and thinking of African Americans being sold and standing on this platform, and having these chains that are holding you down. But as I moved through my show and through life, and I came across the image on the bottom, and I was like, that also references, there is a beauty to self, but through kind of honoring history, but also looking further back to that. Then that's thinking about this collar that I put around what you may call the neck of this piece, and seeing it as this decorative and adornment, and not as these chains that are being weighing you down and holding you down, and thinking about this top. At first I was thinking about it as not a clown hat, but kind of, what are those pointy, a Joker's hat almost, but then being able to see it as hair, which is, I have a lot of, and is very important and very precious as well, and very beautiful. So using these, thinking about these two images, even though they weren't there when I was creating the piece, I thought about them afterwards. I started to think about how those can really influence my thinking. And this piece here is, it's called Untitled 60 Ball. So this is the first iteration of it, and I have these 6 4x4s, and I was really thinking about them as kind of like a family unit. So thinking about it as a community, I thought about it with how I was arranging it as my family, and though that's not super important, it's just how I got to the design elements of it. So I really want to think about the interconnectedness of bodies here. So that's why I use this t-shirt rope or t-shirt yarn to tie these all together to show that they're connected in different ways. And I just thought about the relationships within my family to think about how to kind of tie them together. So that's not really important because I think the importance is just thinking about interconnectedness and weaving together of individuals for this piece. And here's a little detail of that shot. And this piece was forever changing and it's continuing to change. So this was the second iteration of it. And this is, we have shipping containers in Phoenix that you can show in, and I was invited to show into it. So I was really thinking about with this one, bodies within shipping containers, like what do we ship, what are these products, how are they held, kind of restrained in these spaces. So wanted to create a different orientation, but also I'm always trying to push how I've installed them before and push the limits of balance and design with it as well. So suspending some of these, really having them held up from the wall. Whenever I install these pieces, I really like them to be just relying on themselves, and then also I'll bring in t-shirts or t-shirt rope. So the next iteration of this, I guess I could show that first, is this here. This was displayed in a display case at a local community college in Phoenix. And again, I was thinking about this idea of being on display, and what that means to be on display. And because it was not long after that self-portrait piece, I was again still in this idea of thinking about the images that I've seen of people who look like me and ones I haven't seen, you know? So wanting to speak on the history of African Americans, especially within America, and them being linked together, these images of them being linked together in the chains, but thinking about how can you maybe reclaim and re-own that image, and thinking about the ties of family and the lineage of family and the colors that come from that, and almost the linking of one another. So that's how I came to this piece and how it's displayed, but also choosing to have the rope that's connecting all of them. And it's not connected to that first one, just thinking about the elder, the shaman, the oldest with it as well. The third iteration of this was in a kind of, what's the experimental space, I would say, I was invited to show in. And with this piece, again, because I'm always kind of thinking about, like, if I feel stuck, I'm like, okay, how can I think about this as individuals, as a unit, and like what's happening in my life at the time. And so I related back to my family. And with this one, I was really thinking about my family that's in Pittsburgh, so these 4 that are there, and then the longing to be with them of the 2, would be my brother and myself, who are now both on the West Coast over here. So that's what got me to thinking about how I'm going to group these and orient them together. And then again, always experimenting with how I can balance them and play with them in the space. So with this one, I wanted to see how I can start to pull them off of the wall, even though this is still kind of dependent on the wall. I have them being held up by steel posts that are kind of just pushing them off the wall a little bit. And then really just playing with suspension with them as well, which led to the 4th iteration of them, which with this one, what was happening at the time is my grandfather had just passed away, and this was like a big thing for me. It was like the first major person in my family to really pass away. So I was thinking about losing him, and then also the act of losing kind of a generation. He was the last one living from his siblings, so just thinking about how we went from his generation now to my mother's generation. So really wanted to think about the falling of that generation, but also how it's being held up, and thinking about how it's being held up by current and future generations. And again, just experimenting with balance and push and pull. So this piece is just held up. This one is actually held up by paracord wire, but all of these pieces are connected through one wire, so it's really reliant on balance, and the piece is like if you push one, then one falls. So I really enjoy that about the piece. I'm not sure if you know that looking at it, and it also kind of makes it a little bit of a headache to install sometimes. And the current iteration of this, the fifth one, I just installed this piece at Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, and they're all standing up and relying on one another, and they're bound together by t-shirts to hold them in place. And with this piece, I was really thinking about how our bodies can come together to act as, to hold each other up and protect each other, and to also how our bodies act as barriers for one another. So really thinking about the riots that happened, they've been happening forever, but really at the start of COVID, with the Black Lives Matter, but how we came together as a collective to really support one another and act as a barrier for one another. So this piece, I'm just showing just installation shots because you can really move around this piece, and each angle is a little more striking. And this is my favorite angle, and it's the only image I was able to get was during install. So sorry, I apologize for like what's happening in the background. But I really wanted to show how it's like really pushing this idea of balance and holding one another up, because, and I think you see it most in this angle, and how this like bar, 4x4 on the left is like really pushing on the lean. And then that brings us to the show here. So I snapped these today. And some of this work is brand new, and some of it is just new in the way that it's being installed. But I thought I'd speak about my idea behind the installation and the pieces in here that I didn't really get to speak about. So these ones that are hanging here are single trees, and single trees are wooden or metal bars used to balance the pull of a draught horse or other draught animal when pulling a vehicle. So when I saw these, I was like immediately drawn to them because they speak to labor, they speak to like history and a time period, but they're also just these very interesting pieces. There's like a whole variety of them with different like hardware on them. And I was really just interested in that relationship to labor, and though these are for animals, you can think about, because they're not in that context, you start to question whose labor are we speaking about? And with this piece, so with the two that are furthest out, another thing that I like to play around with is they also remind me of kind of like tree swings, so like tire swings or swings that you'll make with just like a board and rope and tie it around the tree. So as I'm installing them, I want them to be kind of in these daunting positions where you're like, what is this used for? What hookup would I use for this? On what animal or what body? But also, I want to kind of invite you to think about your body on this. So the small one is kind of low to the ground, and it's almost inviting you to like step on it or like swing on it. And the one in the far back is I install it at a height at which I can put my hands up and reach it. So thinking again about this idea and wanting to invite you to think about your body's presence and interactions with these pieces. So it goes from this kind of daunting flavor, kind of there's spikes on this piece to like, but I could swing on it. So it becomes this like playfulness of kind of having a balance between the two in that. And then this piece is brand new, and with this piece, what I really wanted to think about, and what I was thinking about as I put it together was dissociation. And dissociation is a mental process of disconnecting from one's thoughts, feelings, memories, or sense of identity. So with this, I was really thinking about these center poles as figures, as bodies, and the skins that I created for it as shells, so that you, and really seeing it as ways of you peeling away from yourself, but also as you layering up yourself to like kind of still hide and disorient like who you are and what's seen of you. You can think of the idea of masking, which is kind of changing your self depending on the situation and where you're at to make it more comfortable and more tolerable. So thinking about that as well. Wanting it to be on these cement blocks that feel really grounded and stable, but it is only held from one central rebar, and it's kind of off the ground a little bit. So thinking of the idea of like, I'm kind of grounded, but not really grounded. Some are more grounded than others. And just bringing in the color to bring in like a layer of playfulness, but also this layer of kind of, I guess maybe confusion that comes with this, with the act of dissociating. Also, pink is like my favorite color, so it's one that is found within my pieces a lot, and I think it works because you can find, I love the pinks, there's such a breadth of pink that you can think about, pinks that you can find within the body, these bright pinks that have this intensity behind it, pink and its relationship to gender and the fact that it's seen as this super feminine color right now, but before it was seen as a masculine color because it's in the family of red, which is seen as a very strong and masculine color. So I like everything that you can play around with the color pink, so that's why there's so much of it as well in my work. And just wanted to show kind of like a detailed close-up of this, of one of the pieces and one of the figures within this grouping of dissociation. And that's my show for you all. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any and all questions regarding my work, regarding just like kind of things I speak about, things I'm interested in. The show, if you have been able to see it, or if you've helped me install it as well. Yes.
Cydnei, thank you so much for the insight. I really appreciate your talk. I was curious to hear a little bit more about, you were just talking about color, use of color and pink, but just in general, it seems like a lot of the materials are ready-made and natural colors, but then there's like color accents. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about your use of color, and also maybe relatedly t-shirts, why t-shirts?
Yeah. So t-shirts I brought in, I feel like there's several reasons, but the first and like, I guess most important one is its relationship to the body. So thinking about bodies, I feel like t-shirt is a material that we're all familiar with, that and as I'm making the t-shirt yarn, which is like just one strip of it, or the t-shirt rope, I like to leave elements t-shirt, so when you're looking at it, you can start to see some of the, like the collar or the tag or the sewing in it, and you can start to think, okay, t-shirt, I know this material, I have one on, kind of. So a way to kind of bring the body and the viewer into the piece. And then I love the process of making rope, and that's like a material that's readily available everywhere. But also I really, with a lot of my work, though I really enjoy scavenging and just finding materials to work with, part of it is just like the way I learned to build as a kid. But also part of it is also that I, kind of like the moral standing of like where I'm at, that I rather upcycle and use found things, just thinking about my footprint in the world and how I can maybe minimalize that. So the t-shirts that I use are my t-shirts that I'm getting rid of, or families or friends, or like secondhand thrifted t-shirts. So that's the t-shirts. The colors, so I do use a lot of industrial and like ready-made things. I think maybe, sorry, kind of get to this piece. Because I feel like this piece can start to talk about it. This is made of foam, cement, concrete, t-shirt, different threads, and then those at the top that are, you can think of as the head, is grill burners that I found. But a lot of my work, I always just used kind of the natural state it came in, and the natural patina. And I really just am drawn to that patina. And the only reason that I can think about is, again, really back to like Pittsburgh and what I've seen. But that's how I'm drawn to it in work, but like in my life, I am drawn to very bright things. So though I'm like in green today, I often am in like bright yellow and bright pink and bright blue. So I was just like, how do I start to bring kind of cross the two worlds, is one way of thinking of it. And it's something that I got a lot of like questions about as well. Is like, why is there no color in your work? You're a very colorful person. And I was always worried about bringing color in, kind of thinking about how to bring color in, what does color start to represent, how can you use it where it's not the primary focus of the piece. So I started to just kind of dabble with it. So this one I started to bring it in through the concrete, and then the threads I was bringing in on the outside, and just wanted to bring in kind of little hints, and again, colors from my life that I really like to use. And the pink on that I bring in as hints, I really started to bring the pink in as well to, it was my way of thinking of color as a portal for others to enter my piece, my work. Because for a while, I felt my work was really heavy, and really dark, and I found people found it like a little hard to talk about or hard to approach. And though there are those themes, and thinking about the positions that or like thinking about the body being positioned within these pieces, there's also like a playfulness, and that comes with all of my work, because it also comes from a place of play, because I find these materials, I look at them as puzzles, and then it's my job to kind of create around them. So I kind of have fun with it as well, before it gets to that place of seriousness, for lack of a better word. I hope that answered.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? they're able to make it to the opening day at 4:30. And we can chat then more. We can chat amongst the work, and I also understand that it's sometimes intimidating to ask questions. So I'm around, and I'd love to just chat with you about the work, but about life and about your work and stuff as well. So thank you all, and thank you for having me here.
Thanks for the donations.
Yeah, I wish I could remember her name.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah,
Should I end it?
How'd it go?